Right.
Hello everyone. My name is William Plotnick, and I am the executive director of Cine Limite. Cine Limite is a New York City-based nonprofit organization dedicated to exhibiting repertory Brazilian cinema internationally and promoting cultural exchange between the United States and Brazil. Thank you all for joining us for tonight's virtual live event, Anselmo Duarte in Focus, in honor of the trailblazing and ever important Brazilian filmmaker. Tonight's event is part of the currently running program on cinelimite.com titled From the Studio to the Sertão, 4 Films by Anselmo Duarte. Presented by Cine Limite and the Instituto Anselmo Duarte, this program, which ends July 15th, features free access to the first 4 films directed by Anselmo Duarte: the 1957 Absolutamente Certo, the 1962 Palme d'Or winning O Pagador de Promessas, the 1965 film Vereda da Salvação, and the 1969 Cangaço film Guelé do Pageu. It's our honor to be able to present the 4 films in this program with English subtitles for the very first time, thanks to the work of our translator, Paulo Scarpa. I encourage people to check out the already published supplementary content in the program, including articles by Donny Correia, Bernardo Oliveira, Joyce Pais, as well as a new video essay by Michel Chetert, and to keep a lookout for a final article by Lucas dos Reis Thiago, which will be published early this upcoming week. Before we get started, I'd like to say a few thank yous. I'd like to introduce our panelists and introduce tonight's session. After that, I will pass things over to Ricardo Duarte, who would also like to say a few introductory words. So tonight's event would not have been possible without the generosity of Columbia University School of the Arts, Carly Rodriguez, Daphne Duarte, Paulo Wences Duarte, and the Instituto Anselmo Duarte. I'd also like to thank everyone in attendance at tonight's event. Please feel free to post any questions you may have for the panelists in the chat, and we will get to your questions throughout the discussion. And speaking of those who have made tonight possible, I'll now introduce our very special panelists who will be contributing to the discussion throughout tonight's event. Joining us tonight is Ricardo Duarte, the son of Anselmo Duarte and the director of the Instituto Anselmo Duarte. We have Donny Correia, who is a writer, a film critic, and a filmmaker. We have Roberto Ribeiro, who is the executive producer of O Pagador de Promessas and a longtime friend of Anselmo Duarte. And we have Gustavo Menezes, who is the associate director of Cine Limite, and he will be our translator tonight. Throughout tonight's event, Roberto Ribeiro will be communicating with us in Portuguese, and Gustavo will be translating for us. So I really thank Gustavo for being here and being willing to do that. The goal of our film program, From the Studio to the Sertão, 4 films by Anselmo Duarte, has been to start a wider discussion around the work of Anselmo Duarte, especially in English language scholarship of Brazilian cinema. Prior to this retrospective, the only film directed by the Sao Paulo filmmaker with available English subtitles had been his Palme d'Or winning O Pagador de Promessas. While many have written about how winning the Palme d'Or impacted Duarte's career, for the better or for the worse, the fact of the matter is that Anselmo Duarte is perhaps best known internationally for O Pagador and for his somewhat dramatized ideological feud with the Rio de Janeiro-based Cinema Novo filmmakers. But in reality, there is much more to Anselmo Duarte than the Palme d'Or and this feud. And with tonight's session, we hope to be able to reflect on him, his career, and what made some of his work so special. Anselmo Duarte was a star actor of the Brazilian studio era throughout the 40s and the 50s, after which he went on one of the greatest directorial runs in the history of Brazilian cinema. Absolutamente Certo is one of the most fun and formally innovative Brazilian studio films, rich with ideas and remarkable actor performances, including Duarte himself playing the lead role. O Pagador de Promessas took the face of an emerging Brazilian cinema that openly dealt with social themes. Vereda da Salvação, which is surely one of the most overlooked masterpieces of Brazilian cinema, saw Duarte at perhaps the height of his creative powers. The film Vereda is a disturbing portrayal of religious occultism and fanaticism, while embracing a radical and unforgettable cinematographic style. Then, Quelé do Pageu proved that Duarte could, essentially, do it all, creating an undeniable action Western adventure in Brazil known as a cangaço film, no the less darker than his previous efforts. Quelé is rightly considered one of the great cangaço films in the history of Brazilian cinema. Tonight's discussion will solely focus on these 4 films. One reason being because they are the only works with English subtitles by the director, but also because they serve as an incredible snapshot of his career, his formal style, and his ideological interests. And tonight, we will surely be spending extra time in discussion around O Pagador de Promessas, as we are fortunate enough to have the film's executive producer here to join us. Our event tonight is not meant to cover every aspect related to the long and incredible life of Anselmo Duarte, and I do hope that details left out or films unmentioned can be discussed and covered in a future Cine Limite event. I'd also very quickly like to mention the ongoing situation of the Cinemateca Brasileira in Brazil. The Cinemateca Brasileira is one of the most important film archives in the world and the largest film archive in Brazil. Since the beginning of the pandemic, the Cinemateca Brasileira has been shut down by the Brazilian government, leaving numerous film preservationists and archivists out of work and putting at risk thousands upon thousands of Brazilian films, just as very similar to the ones which we will be speaking about tonight. We very much hope that this issue is resolved soon and the film preservationists in Brazil can get back to the work at this very important institution. So with all this said, I would like to now turn things over to Ricardo Duarte, who has a few introductory remarks for tonight's event. After Ricardo's introduction, I look forward to hearing more about the work of Anselmo Duarte from our 3 panelists. So Ricardo, the mic is all yours. Please feel free to introduce, from your perspective, tonight's event.
Okay, William, thank you. Well, first of all, I'm very glad to be here tonight, participating in this meeting, this discussion. As you said before, I am the son of Anselmo Duarte, and I guess that most of our viewers, I don't know if I'm right, but I suppose that most of the people who are watching this program, this meeting, might be not very familiar with Anselmo Duarte, what he did, his importance for the Brazilian history of cinematography, and so if I may, I would like to say to put into perspective some facts that I think is important so that people can be more familiarized with who was Anselmo Duarte. Anselmo spent his last 7 years before he died. He died in 2009. He was 89 years old, and he spent his last years living here with me in my house for 7 years. Of course, at that time, he was not involved in filmmaking. he had been retired for some time, but we had uh, a lot of opportunity to discuss about his views on uh, the importance of his work and his life. At that time, one day he told me that he would like to, um, for Brazilians, to particularly the new generations, um, to be aware of what he did, the films he produced, the films he acted. He was an actor, he was a producer, he was a director, and he thought that um, he should found an institute, the Institute Anselmo Duarte, so that through that institute, people could get access to things that he noticed that most young uh, people who wanted to make films in Brazil did not have. So he founded the institute, and I became the executive director. Um, uh, I would like to say also that uh, Anselmo, he was. I personally think that the most important legacy that he left was his life itself as a man, as a person, because the history of his life, it's an amazing event in the whole spectrum of his life. Anselmo uh, was born in 1920. That's about 100 years ago. He was born in a very, very small village in the interior of Brazil called Salto. Salto means in English jump. Uh, Waterfall. There was a waterfall in Salto, and waterfall in Portuguese is jump. That's why Salto has the name Salto. It was a very, very small town. The streets were unpaved. Um, there was one factory who a textile factory in Salto, and Anselmo was the youngest child of a family of 7 brothers, and all of his brothers and sisters worked, as 80% of the village worked for this textile. He was his family was very poor, very simple, and this boy, the youngest of the family, he grew up without uh, any knowledge of modern things, of luxury, nothing. It was a very poor family. When he was at that time, there was a small um, cinema in Salto, and he he started going to see those films when he was about 8 years old. But he didn't have money to pay for the ticket, so at that time the films, most of the films were American, and they had no sound, and he worked uh, wetting the screen so that in the back of the screen, uh, because that's what people did at that time, the projector was very hot. And by watching those films, he developed this love for filmmaking. And he went to Sao Paulo, the capital city, when he was about 14 years old, and he started to work to help to provide for his family. Then he went, when he was around 18 years old, he went to Rio de Janeiro, and and that was about the time of the Second World War. Um, anyway, he became uh, an actor. He was, he was a very handsome guy, tall, well dressed, handsome, and he was invited to uh, to to start the main role of a film in 1948. And all of a sudden, he became a big celebrity, a big actor. In 1948, there was not television in Brazil, and going to the movies was the main the main
Entertainment,
event
the main form of
for the
entertainment.
people to have fun, and he became really a celebrity. Anyway, there are many stories about how Anselmo, that poor boy, uh, became a big star, and he made around 40 films around throughout his life. So the Institute of Anselmo Duarte um, is has been in existence to help young people to inspire themselves on the life of Anselmo Duarte, so that they can believe that it is possible to do important things, to go abroad, to conquer the world as he did. So these are my introduction words to put into perspective the life of Anselmo.
Thank you, Ricardo. That's a beautiful introduction. And with that, I would like to get into some of the main questions for tonight. And I wanted to begin by noting that it is remarkable that all three panelists here tonight have known Anselmo Duarte personally. Of course, Ricardo is Anselmo's son, but we also have here tonight Roberto Ribeiro, who was Anselmo Duarte's lifelong friend, and Donny Correia, who very recently told me that he, in fact, has met Anselmo Duarte. So I would like to begin our event by posing a question to our three panelists, and I'll begin with Donny. Can you recount your early experiences meeting and getting to know Anselmo Duarte? What were your feelings about the director going into that meeting? And what kind of impact did becoming friends or acquaintances or interviewing him have on your career and life? Thank you, Donny.
Hi, everybody. Thank you very much, William, for this opportunity. And that's very nice for me. That's very good for me to be here in honor of the memory of Anselmo Duarte, one of the greatest here in Brazil. Yeah, one of the greatest filmmakers in the world, I think, and underrated and sort of forgotten for long. Indeed, I had the opportunity to meet him personally when I was just 13. That was back in 1993. And at that time, I somehow, because of my family background, yeah, my father and my mother used to go to cinema and see Anselmo, and they used to talk about Anselmo and the films from Atlântida and Veracruz at home. So that somehow made me feel like very interesting in knowing not only the history of Brazilian filmmaking, but also the history of my family itself. So that was when in 1993, Folha de São Paulo, one of the major newspaper here in Brazil, published an interview with Anselmo by the time he was releasing this book here, this very book here, Adeus Cinema, which means goodbye cinema. And that was his biography, written by a journalist, Oséias Sig Jr. from Salto, yeah, the city where Ricardo was just talking about just now. And my father showed me that interview because he used to subscribe the newspaper. So he received the newspaper and he showed me and said, "So that's the guy I told you who directed O Pagador de Promessas," which was a very spoken film, a very much spoken film at home, because that marked really, really in a very important way, my father and my mother's life, because it was a very important film at those times, that time. So, and I was very, like curious to learn that the guy who made O Pagador de Promessas was still alive, and he was about to release a book about his life. So somehow my father got in touch with the newspaper, with the guy who wrote the who made the interview, and the guy gave him the telephone number of Anselmo Duarte, something that would be really unimaginable nowadays. uh, why do you want the phone number of the guy, for heaven's sake? So anyway, the next thing I know is that we went to Itu, which is really next, really close to Salto, and we visited him. And he was in his 70s at that time. He was 73, I think, and he was actually really retired from the filmmaking. Um, he acted in Limonge Batista's Brasa Adormecida, I think. Yeah, it was his last goal on cinema. That was back in 87, 1987. And in 1993, he was really retired. So we went there, and he was very gentle, and he was very nice with us, like we were unknowns for him. So he sort of guessed us very well and told stories, and it was very nice. And the thing that really made me an impact is that when we went there for the first time, the book was yet unreleased, right? So I saw this very gentle guy, telling about his adventures in cinema and everything. So a month later, I had a chance to get in touch with the book. I read the book like in 1 or 2 days, so curious I was to get to know more about this man, Anselmo Duarte. And I remember that the harsh guy that he shows in the book, the guy who goes harsh on the people of cinema here in Brazil, especially Glauber Rocha or Norma Bengel or this sort of things, things that he actually let goes in the book was completely different from that gentle old man I had the chance to meet. And in a way, uh, uh, I felt like that was the kickstart to go and learn more about Brazilian film industry, Brazilian film history. That was when I started to record with VHS old films that was broadcasted on TV, and to learn more and to get we're talking about the 90s, so we didn't have the internet to help us with that. So I had to recur to books and magazines. And even in those days, Anselmo Duarte was not a common name anymore, right? Because we have to think that we were just like 10 years from Glauber's death, and the Cinema Novo was still something that caused great impact to the new generation that was coming to be the new filmmakers in the 90s. But even though I sort of developed some some identification with the person, the man Anselmo Duarte. That was he was a very enigmatic person, like as I said, he was a very nice guy, he was a very gentle guy, but when you read his memories, he'd gone through many things, and he was the person who actually started not cinema novo, the movement, but the new Brazilian cinema as a whole. And that's the thing that till nowadays, many people, many scholars even here in Brazil, do not understand the very difference that is the new cinema in Brazil and the Cinema Novo movement. He was just a great guy. And I'm very happy that we're here praising his memory tonight.
Thank you for that, Donny. Gustavo, can you relay the same question to Roberto? We would like to know the story of him first meeting Anselmo Duarte, his first impressions of him, and those early years when they became friends.
Bom, Roberto, nós gostaríamos de saber como foi que o senhor conheceu o Anselmo Duarte, como foi a convivência de vocês dois, as primeiras impressões que o senhor teve dele, as primeiras colaborações.
Eu primeiro queria dar uma atenção ao nosso amigo Donny Correia, que é a explanação que ele fez sobre a maneira de ser do Anselmo foi muito bem feita. Inclusive, eu tenho aqui no meu computador um livro que foi feito pelo dentista dele, o Januário Pascoal, no Rio de Janeiro.
Dá licença.
É porque ele precisa trazer.
Dá licença. Com licença, dá licença. Porque é a maneira de ser dele. Ele nunca foi prepotente, ele nunca usou o poder do nome dele para nada. Ele sempre entrava pedindo licença.
Posso só traduzir?
Ele está pedindo tempo para traduzir.
Desculpe. So he says he just wants to complement some info Donny just offered us about Anselmo's temperament. He says a book called Da Licença by, sorry, I didn't get the author's name. Como é o nome do...
That was written by his dentist, Anselmo's dentist, com licença.
Okay. Yeah, it says...
Januário Pascoal.
Okay, Januário Pascoal, in which he says Anselmo wasn't very convinced, very full of himself. He didn't use his own fame or name to get ahead. So pode continuar.
Bom, queria saber como eu conheci Anselmo. Eu estava falando, mas vocês não tinham entrado no ar ainda. Eu conheci na Atlântida, onde passei a frequentar depois que um diretor foi jantar lá em casa com meus pais e me liberou a entrada no estúdio a hora que eu quisesse.
Okay. So he met him in Atlântida Studios after one of its directors came to have dinner at his house, at Roberto's house, and allowed him entrance anytime he could go there. So the door was always open for him.
Bom, daí, estando com entrada livre na Atlântida, eu passei a todo o tempo que não tinha o que fazer, entre estudos e coisa, eu passei a frequentar o estúdio. E, como sempre fui muito curioso e gostava de cinema, fui me introduzindo na maneira de filmar. E em pouco tempo, eu fui convidado, com 17 anos, para ser assistente de direção de um filme que o Anselmo Duarte trabalhava.
Certo. So he says, whenever he had any free time, he used to go to Atlântida Studios, and he was very curious about how films were made, and so he started working there very early on. Pode.
A minha ligação com o Anselmo, daí para frente, ele passou a frequentar a minha casa, a minha família, ficou amigo do meu pai. Eu tinha 17 anos, ele tinha 28, mas eu era bem crescido, bem alto, e já era um assistente de direção. Então...
Okay. When they met at Atlântida Studios, Anselmo was 28 and Roberto was 17. and they became friends and began visiting each other's houses. And Roberto became an assistant director at Atlântida. So, okay.
A nossa amizade passou a ser saída de noite com pessoal de cinema, pessoal de teatro. O Anselmo não sabia dirigir, eu ensinei ele a dirigir. E, enfim, foi um tempo muito bom, o tempo que ele permaneceu no Rio. Depois ele mudou para São Paulo.
So they started going out together at night, and Anselmo didn't know how to drive, and Roberto taught him how to drive. He says it was a very nice time in their lives. And then after that, Anselmo went to São Paulo, to Rio.
Aí a distância não fez que a nossa amizade diminuísse, que eu sempre que ia a São Paulo procurava, eu ia com ele para Itu, que ele tinha filha que ainda morava lá, ficava lá na casa da dona Aura, que era a irmã dele, e essa vida continuou, sempre juntos, viajando e conhecendo, discutindo, trocando ideias. Conheci o Ricardo quando ainda estava no colégio, com 11 anos.
Okay. So even though they were distant, whenever Roberto went to São Paulo, they would travel together and still kept their friendship. And that's when Roberto actually met Ricardo, who was still a schoolboy.
Por sorte, depois de algum tempo, eu fui a São Paulo e, contratado por um outro estúdio, acabei fazendo um filme com Anselmo, no qual eu era também assistente de direção. Foi um filme feito na Veracruz, que foi o Cantor e Milionário, que é um filme feito depois do Absolutamente Certo.
So once, by chance, Roberto went to São Paulo, and he was contracted by another studio, and he worked together with Anselmo in a film called O Cantor e o Milionário, which was shot right after Absolutamente Certo.
O filme era filmado nos estúdios da Veracruz, e durante a filmagem ele também supervisionava o término do Absolutamente Certo, que estava em fase de dublagem, de sonorização, de coisa. Então, eu também participava disso, porque estávamos trabalhando no mesmo estúdio. E também foi um tempo assim de mais proximidade entre nós.
So as the film was being shot, as O Cantor e o Milionário was being shot, Anselmo was supervising the editing and dubbing of Absolutamente Certo. And that's when Roberto also started collaborating with Anselmo's directorial debut in the post-production.
Finalmente, eu voltei para o Rio, e um dia o Anselmo me aparece e diz: temos um negócio para fazer. Eu vou fazer um filme na Bahia e quero te levar como amigo e como assistente e para me ajudar lá a domar aquela gente.
So one day, Roberto went back to Rio, and one day Anselmo came up to him and said, I'm going to Bahia to shoot a new movie, and I want you to come with me as my assistant and my friend to help me tame that people.
I think we can stop the story there and then pick it up when we come to the film, Gustavo. Can you express that?
Ok, vamos deixar a história por aqui agora, que quando a gente voltar a discutir o Pagador de Promessas, o senhor pode contar essa história
porque aí a gente entra no Pagador de Promessas.
Sim, exato.
Okay.
Gustavo, may I say a word, please?
Yes.
Roberto mentioned about the book, Da Licença. Da Licença in English is excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason for that name is because when Anselmo went to Cannes in 1962, when he took o Pagador de Promessas to the festival, Anselmo was not known by anybody. He was just, and nobody knew who he was. So when he went to the Palais du Festival, the main building, he had to go through all those people at the main door, and to make his way through, he had to say to everybody, excuse me, excuse me, excuse me, because nobody knew who he was. That's why the book is called Excuse Me, Dá Licença.
Ah, it's a great story.
Okay.
Can I tell a story about that too, please?
Go ahead.
A very
Go
quick
ahead.
story, yeah.
Go ahead.
Because he, in the first time I visit him with my family, he gave me a copy of this book, and he autographed that because the book Adeus Cinema was not available yet. And when we went back there a few months later, he actually autographed my copy of Adeus Cinema. And actually here he says, Ao caro Donny, well, it says to dear Donny, future great filmmaker, with best regards of Anselmo Duarte. I didn't become a great filmmaker, but I like to think that I'm on my way to become a great film critic, thanks to Anselmo. So that was the story, and I have the copy. I keep that in my cupboard over there. It's one of my relics.
Thank you for that
Great.
story. So tonight we're talking about Anselmo Duarte, the director, but I don't think we can really do that unless we first spend a little bit of time speaking about Anselmo Duarte, the actor. Now, Anselmo Duarte was one of the biggest movie stars in the history of Brazil. I looked it up before tonight's event, and he starred in something like over 20 feature-length films prior to directing his first work. Classics such as Carnaval no Fogo, Aviso aos Navegantes, Tico Tico no Fuba, and Sinha Moço. So I want to briefly go back to right before Absolutamente Certo to talk about who was Anselmo Duarte, the director. And I want to pose my first question to Donny and ask, Donny, can you talk a bit more about the Brazilian studio era system that birthed Anselmo Duarte? And can you paint a picture of how major his stardom really was in Brazil? Was this someone that could not walk out onto the street without being recognized and tackled by a zillion people?
Well, I used to say to my students mainly that Anselmo Duarte is the first real star of Brazilian film system with a name and a surname, right? In a sense that it occurs exactly as you said. You go out in the streets and you get recognized immediately, and there's people going around you, and asking for autographs and pictures and everything. We didn't have such thing here in Brazil because Brazilian film industry is not really an industry. It's more a system where things finishes and starts all over again, finishes and starts all over again. So by the time we have someone like Anselmo Duarte coming on and becoming an actor, we have to understand that actually he was more interested in becoming a drama actor. Yeah, he had all the features of a prototype of a Hollywoodian actor, with an actor from Hollywood. He was tall, handsome. He always played the good guy role, and he was the dream of all the girls, and all mothers wanted him for a son-in-law, as we say here in Brazil. But he was much more interested in acting as a drama actor. And things changed drastically when he went to Atlântida in late 40s, yeah, 48, 47, 48. And he starred in a film that actually introduced to Brazilian audience and to Brazilian filmmaking, the standards of Brazilian filmmaking, a more dynamic film, like it's when I talk about dynamics, I mean, the sort of film that you have adventure, you have a bit of punches, you have a bit of adventure, you have a bit of romance, you have a lot of music. Yeah, carnival, like the music for carnival. And when he was in Atlântida, he became friends with this guy Watson Macedo, which was a very, very important person uh, to Anselmo in a way he would direct later on. Because when he meets Watson in Atlântida already, yeah, he invites Anselmo for to actually star in a chanchada, and chanchada is that sort of film that actually have a lot of a lot of music, actually, little action, and that's it. It's just like a vaudeville show, but in the cinema instead of on stage. So, and Anselmo said, "Okay, I would like to. I wouldn't like, actually," he said, "I wouldn't like to star a film with that little, standard of with that little features, But if you let me write the story, I would be glad to star in your film." So since the very beginning, he was much more interested in what goes on behind the camera rather than what goes on in front of the camera. Because there are some late interviews by Anselmo Duarte where he says that he became an actor by accident. He didn't mean to become an actor, but he became an actor, and the most famous of them at that time. So when Anselmo learns the crafts of filmmaking with Watson Macedo, even though he was always playing the good guy, playing the main role and everything, he was always thinking about directing, writing his own stuff. By late 70s, that was a very peculiar time here in Brazilian film industry, because that was the time, 57, 58. That was the time when all the studios were going bankrupt. They're all closing, they were all shutting down, because Veracruz was in that situation. Atlântida would shut down their operations by 62, I think. And Maristela was on the same way. Cinedia was a long forgotten studio, the first one, and one of the very best ones, but long forgotten at that time, late 50s, I'm saying. And Anselmo had to count on independent producers. So somehow, as he had no contract at that time anymore because of the closure of the studios, he thought that that was the right time to give a step further and direct his own movie. So he associated with Massaini, Osvaldo Massaini from Cine Distri, which, by the way, was a distribution company, not a production company. So, and became a production company, and one of the main one for the years to come. And so once associated, Anselmo gathered all the experience he got from the chanchada, right? And joined everything in a sort of very peculiar comedy, which is titled Absolutamente Certo. That's the film. He gathered all the experience which he had with the musical, with the comedy itself, with the drama, like the melodrama, that drama that eventually turns out well, but you have that drama. So he put it all together, and he wrote a script that is very, very, very unusual for that time. Because when you think about musical comedies, you think about Rio de Janeiro, you think about Carnival, you think about the girls dancing and the guys singing, you see. But he did quite the contrary, because he brought all this culture and develop that into a story that takes place in São Paulo. And for us who live here in Brazil, the culture of São Paulo is very different from Rio de Janeiro, you know. It is clear that it's not like uh, doing it's not like directing a movie about, you know, like happiness and everything goes well in the end, and it's going to talk to everyone's culture, you know. It's a very Paulista film, as I would say, as it seems as well. So after doing that, you know, after gathering all these references and turning into a film that is very Paulista, um, he did something that nobody thought about before. And Sinigistri, you know, Massaini, back in the production of, you know, was a great thing, because that gave the possibility to, you know, raise a lot of money out of the box office, because the film was a huge success, and that made possible for Anselmo to get his share of these profits and go to Europe to study film in the real location where things were happening, like the Nouvelle Vague, the English documentary school, whatever. Somehow he was thinking, I'm gonna do it again, and I'm gonna do it better. So that was the magical thing about the because it was like Anselmo was like the guy who actually learned the things doing it. Yeah, it was
Yeah,
much more of a empirism, if you can call it.
sure. I also want to take the opportunity to ask Roberto Ribeiro if he has any specific memories that can help portray Anselmo Duarte's stardom. So throughout his friendship, does he have any memories which prove what it means to be a movie star in Brazil, a kind of maybe paparazzi sort of memory or something like that, in that early period specifically?
O William pergunta ao Roberto se ele tem alguma memória, alguma lembrança de como era essa questão do Anselmo ser uma estrela de cinema na época, especialmente no começo da carreira, logo que ele se tornou o galã, se tem algum caso de, por exemplo, paparazzi perseguindo ele, ou fãs assediando na rua, qualquer coisa assim.
Não tinha tanto isso de paparazzi, porque naquele tempo o pessoal era mais bem educado. Isso é para princípio de conversa.
So there weren't many paparazzi in those days because people were more educated or polite.
There were those jealous guy who wanted to beat him just because he was more beautiful than the guys.
Yeah.
Eu vou aproveitar o que o nosso amigo acabou de falar agora, dizer que a Atlântida, que fazia os filmes de carnaval, muita gente cantando, muita gente dançando, mostrando a beleza do Rio, e São Paulo fazia um filme mais sério. É que São Paulo tinha importado todos os técnicos da Inglaterra, da Itália, da Tchecoslováquia, de todo lugar, e que iam fazer um filme, trouxeram o Alberto Cavalcante e tudo, e nunca conseguiram fazer um filme brasileiro. Faziam um filme sobre o assunto brasileiro, mas que era um ranço de programa feito lá fora.
So Roberto explains the difference about São Paulo films and Rio de Janeiro films. Atlântida in Rio did more musical comedies, carnival comedies, and São Paulo made more serious pictures because they imported filmmakers and technicians from Europe, from all over Europe, and brought back Alberto Cavalcante, who was a Brazilian filmmaker who had built a career in Europe. And they wanted to make like serious artistic pictures, but they didn't look or feel Brazilian.
I would add to that, just quickly, I would add to that the critics would say that those were in Veracruz, they would make, actually they would film pictures in Brazil, but they were not Brazilian, right? Because they were all themed from abroad, or from Italy mainly?
Bom, eu vou fazer um apanhado da vida do Anselmo. A Atlântida, que fazia esses musicais e que ela era mais uma escola de cinema do que uma produtora de cinema. Em 1942, entraram dois americanos na Atlântida, fardados, que eles chamavam-se John Ford e Greg Toland.
So Atlantida was much more a film school than a film production company. In 1942, two American guys came there to visit, called John Ford and Greg Toland.
Wow. Opa.
Eles foram lá para conhecer o único estúdio que indicaram para eles. Eles eram da Marinha Americana durante a guerra.
They went there to get to know the only studio that was indicated to them. They were part of the Navy, the American Navy back then.
Eles viram as filmagens, o ator amarrado por uma corda na câmera para não se distanciar nem se chegar muito para a câmera, manter o cordão esticado, porque a câmera não tinha correção de foco.
So they watched the shooting of a film, of a scene, and the actor was tied with a rope to the camera, and he had to keep the rope straightened out, because so that way he wouldn't get too close or too far away from the camera. The camera didn't have focal correction in the lenses.
O diretor de fotografia, além de iluminar o cenário, ele era também o cameraman. A câmera era uma Super Parvo francesa que precisava dois homens para levantar, e ele via a cena que estava sendo filmada pelo visor, mas através da película.
So the cinematographer was the cameraman, and also he set up the lights. The camera was so huge that it needed two men to hold it up, and the cinematographer would see look at the shot through the visor directly at the picture.
Depois deles verem as filmagens, nós os levamos para eles verem o material filmado na sala de projeção. E eles, depois de assistirem, disseram: realmente vocês são geniais, porque ninguém consegue fazer o que vocês fazem.
So after John Ford and Greg Toland were done watching the shooting, they went to see the dailies. And then after watching the dailies, they said, you guys are really geniuses, because nobody can do what you do here.
Bom, deixando os americanos para trás, o Anselmo, que era ator na época, ele praticamente morava no estúdio. Porque...
So Anselmo was an actor, still just an actor back then, and he practically lived in the studio.
Você encontrava Anselmo na sala de montagem, na sala de projeção, com o técnico de som, sempre procurando aprender era o que ele fazia.
Anselmo was always in the cutting room, in the projection room, with the editors, with the technicians. He was always trying to learn more and more about filmmaking.
Nos intervalos, ele filmava como ator. E muitas vezes você chegava no estúdio, naquele tempo faziam um copião e tiravam o material que prestava do copião e o resto da película jogavam. Então, ficava aqueles monte de película. De vez em quando, você encontrava o Anselmo cansado, caía lá em cima daquele monte de película e dormia.
So, in those days, they would take the film print and cut out the good parts from it and throw the rest on the floor. And sometimes people would go by in the corridors, and Anselmo would just be lying on the pile of film, sleeping, so tired that he was, because as Roberto put it, he was there to learn, and in his free time, he would shoot as an actor. He would work as an actor.
Quando o Anselmo foi para São Paulo, ele já tinha aprendido a dirigir comigo automóvel, já tinha aprendido a dirigir com Macedo, com Burle, com os outros diretores que tinham lá, já sabia como é que o ator tinha que se comportar, já sabia como montar, e aí ele foi para Veracruz para conhecer o Ralph Rich, que era o montador.
When Anselmo went to work at Veracruz in São Paulo, he already had learned how to drive cars with Roberto and how to direct pictures with Burle and Macedo and other directors. And when he got to São Paulo, he went to meet the European technicians such as Hafen Richter.
E agora chegou na hora de entrar no Pagador.
Okay, now we're going to discuss.
Let's wait. So minuto, Roberto.
Hi. Hi. The matter of the fact is that Anselmo hated being a celebrity. He didn't like being famous at all. And like Roberto just said, he hated also the way he was directed as an actor. So as Roberto said, he went in the studio. He was living practically in the studio to learn everything he could because he wanted to make everything different. He wanted to be a director one day and make things different than the way he was told to be. Right, Roberto?
Que ele agradeceu a mim?
Não, ele está só complementando a informação de que o Anselmo detestava ser famoso, ser uma celebridade, e ele queria aprender a dirigir para fazer tudo diferente do que os filmes que ele estrelava, né? Ele queria fazer.
Ele já não aguentava, ele me dizia, eu não aguento mais ouvir o meu nome, Anselmo Duarte, porque ele passava, as pessoas comentavam, lá vai Anselmo Duarte, mulher pedindo autógrafo. Era um inferno a vida do Anselmo quando saía na rua.
So Anselmo's life was a living hell back when he was a celebrity. He put his foot on the street and people were like, there goes Anselmo Duarte. And he couldn't bear to hear his name anymore, he told Roberto.
Wow. So
he had to learn some jiu-jitsu to defend himself against the jealous guy who would come to hostilize him.
So I think we can leave the star of Anselmo Duarte there. And Roberto, eu tenho só duas perguntas sobre absolutamente certo e depois disso vamos continuar sobre Pagador. So my first question, Ricardo, I'd like to ask, when we were speaking, you mentioned to me that you have some memories as a child on the set of Absolutamente Certo. And I'm curious, and I know that's a long time ago, if you can maybe paint a picture of what the Atlântida studio, or I believe actually it was Synergia, of what that studio was like, especially from your perspective as a child, and all of the actors, all of the commotion there.
Well, Absolutamente Certo was not, the scenes that I saw was not in Rio. It was in São Paulo. It was at the Veracruz studio. And I was 7 years old, 6 or 7 years old. But I remember watching this particular scene being filmed in Absolutamente Certo, which is the scene where there is that singer and dancer singing Zezé, 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 ba-da-da-da-da-da. So that particular scene, I was there. I watched the filming of that particular scene at Veracruz studio, which I remember it was a huge, very tall ceiling, huge studio. And he had this scenario, a rotating scenario for that particular shot, which shows various cities around the world as the dancer and the singer goes with trio Iraquitã singing the music.
Wow. And Donny, if you're still there, I don't know, he might have stepped out. So I think he did. We can move on to O Pagador. I think this is definitely a good moment to do so. Oh, okay,
Donny's
he's here.
back.
Okay,
I'm here.
Donny,
I'm here.
I wanted to quickly just you know, we haven't really spoken about the film Absolutamente Certo. We've spoken about everything around it, and it's such a profound work in that, first of all, it's this intermedial film dealing with TV and film and kind of the connections between those, and a really early example of intermediality in Brazilian cinema. But it also portrays this moment in which televisions became a cultural phenomenon in Brazil at that period. And I'm wondering if maybe you can speak about, I suppose very quickly, a little bit about Anselmo Duarte's a cleverness here to use this moment in which TV is becoming to be this phenomenon in society, and think about cinema through this moment. So all of these shots in the films that begin in the TV, the boxing match, and then the camera moves backwards, and then we're watching people watch the TV. It's something which feels for me so clever and so rare for Brazilian cinema at the time. Can you maybe speak about how innovative that was, and maybe also about television and the role in society?
Well, he was indeed very smart as far as this specific point is concerned. But I would say that he didn't do that like as an spontaneous stuff. I think Anselmo was the sort of guy that was always updated with the reality he was living, and he knew that the culture of studios was falling down. That the studios were collapsing, and this culture was collapsing in general. Like having a studio, getting signed by a big studio and living there, with all the facilities he had, that was gone. So I think on the other hand, actually, we have the TV that not only took a great portion of the audience off from cinemas to their own houses, not only here in Brazil but also in USA. Yeah, that was when, for instance, when we talk about O Pagador de Promessas trying to clash against King of the Kings, we're talking about a film, King of the Kings, that was produced with new technology that film could provide at that time to confront TV as a phenomenon, yeah, as a social phenomenon. So that was the time for huge films and things like that. And Anselmo somehow oversaw that situation, that TV would rob or would like kidnap or would like arrest part of the audiences from the cinemas. And actually, his anticipation is not something like programmed. It's not something like that. He thought, I'm going to put TV into film so that people will understand that I'm trying to make a critic about it, or try to rivalize, to make it to look into television phenomena as a rival or something like this. It's much more that overview to the society as it was at that time, and the role TV had in normal people's life, regular people's life, people that would leave their houses to go to cinema years earlier. So that was very clever that he had a chance, to think about it and actually bring to a film all that novelty that TV was involved with.
Yeah. So I encourage people to check out Joyce Pais's article about Absolutamente Certo to learn more. But let's now move on to O Pagador de Promessas. And the majority of this film and our conversation around this film will be focused on Roberto Ribeiro, but I encourage Donny and Ricardo to speak up and ask questions and share their own feelings when they have them. And I get the feeling that Roberto has a lot to say about this film, and that I don't even need to ask questions. But I'll start off with a question, and we'll take it from there. And my first, just to get started, can Roberto, can you speak a little bit about how he just first got involved with the production of O Pagador de Promessas? When did Anselmo Duarte first ask him to join the crew of the film, and what was his role set to be in the production?
Roberto, o senhor pode falar pouco sobre...
Gustavo, please, I would like to ask Roberto if he went with Anselmo to Bahia before the filming, before shooting the film itself, when he went to Bahia to look for, you know, the place, the sites, the church.
Scout locations.
Did he take part of that?
Okay. Tá.
Gustavo, I would first ask Ricardo's question, and then we could speak about mine.
I think I can make them into one question. Tá. Eu vou juntar as duas perguntas aqui que o William e o Ricardo fizeram. William pergunta quando foi exatamente que o senhor se envolveu na produção do Pagador de Promessas e qual era originalmente a função que o senhor ia desempenhar no filme. E o Ricardo pergunta se o senhor se envolveu desde a pré-produção, se o senhor foi para a Bahia procurar as locações, visitar, enfim, ver onde é que seria filmado.
Um pedaço triste e alegre da história do Pagador é esse. Eu trabalhei com o Anselmo em São Paulo na preparação da viagem, de mandar equipamento, essas coisas todas, e ficou combinado que ele iria na frente, que tinha um grupo de baianos que trabalhavam com Glauber Rocha e com aquele pessoal todo, o Cinema Novo, iam procurar os locais, iam fazer a pré-produção com ele.
Tá. So he says he first was charged, his first job was to send the equipment, and Anselmo would go on ahead beforehand to get in touch with a group of people in Bahia who worked with Glauber Rocha and the Cinema Novo to try and help him with the pre-production. But that's a bittersweet part of the story of the film, he adds.
Quando eu cheguei em Salvador, eu fui de automóvel, porque levamos o automóvel e eu fui com o arquiteto do filme, o cenarista, cenógrafo. Chegando em Salvador, na porta do hotel em que o Anselmo e a equipe estava hospedada, estava a Glória Menezes, a atriz, o Leonardo Vilar, o ator, e o padre, que era o Dionísio Azevedo.
So when Roberto went to Salvador, he went there by car with the scenic artist, with the set designer. And when they got there, at the door of the hotel, there was Glória Menezes and Dionísio Azevedo and Leonardo Vilar? Leonardo Vilar estava lá também. Ok.
O Pagador. Disseram, Roberto, graças a Deus você chegou, porque está um pandemônio isso aqui. A pré-produção não fez absolutamente nada.
So they said, thank God you're here, Roberto, because it's a pandemonium right now. The pre-production couldn't accomplish anything so far.
Bom, aí cheguei de viagem, sentamos na mesa do refeitório do hotel para jantar, e o Anselmo disse que ele estava decidindo se largava a Bahia e ia fazer o filme numa cidade de São Paulo, em Guaratinguetá.
So, as they sat down at the restaurant, in the hotel, to discuss the film, Anselmo said he was considering leaving Bahia and trying to shoot the film in Guaratinguetá, a city in São Paulo?
No dia seguinte, eu comecei a trabalhar. Não quero me vangloriar, mas eu consegui fazer alguma coisa e no dia seguinte à minha chegada, ele conseguiu filmar a cena que tem no jornal, lá, a coisa do jornal. E que depois ia fazer, no dia seguinte, a filmagem no teatro, que era a Glória Menezes tomando banho.
So the following day, the day following Roberto's arrival there, they managed to shoot the scene with the newspaper scene. And the next day, they were set to shoot the scene in the theater with Gloria Menezes showering.
E por aí fomos trabalhando. O assistente de direção, eu fui para tratar de assuntos de produção e ajudá-lo na assistência de direção. Logo nos primeiros dias de filmagem, inclusive tem uma carta do Anselmo na Cinedistre, que é produtora associada do filme, do Anselmo dizendo que, graças à minha pessoa, ele tinha desistido de fazer o filme em Guaratinguetá e que ia continuar na Bahia.
So Roberto was there as an assistant director, and he was also taking care of production stuff. And there's actually a letter at the Cinedistre, the associate production company, in which Anselmo thanks Roberto for making him give up the idea of going to Guaratinguetá and sticking to Salvador, to Bahia, to shoot the film.
Então, no Pagador, eu fui assistente de direção, eu ensinei uma moça a ser script girl, eu fui eletricista, eu fui maquinista e outras coisas mais.
So in the crew of The Given Word, Roberto actually took on a lot of functions. He was an assistant director. He taught a girl to be the script girl. He was an electrician and many other accumulated functions.
A igreja que o Anselmo escolheu, que tem a escadaria, que vocês conhecem, a maior parte das filmagens lá foram à noite. E a igreja a escadaria é fechada e é gente morando de um lado e gente morando do outro em paredões, né?
So most of the scenes at the church picked by Anselmo were shot at night, and it's a closed stairwell, and there are people living on both sides of the church.
Eu tive que fazer amizade com esses moradores todos, porque da janela do quarto deles é que estavam colocados os 2.000, os 5.000, e que durante uma filmagem sabe-se que tem que mudar a posição mais para lá, mais para cá, para melhor incluir. Então, eu tinha a chave do quarto desses moradores para entrar com meus eletricistas para mudar a posição do refletor.
So he had to make friends with all of the people living there around the church because the reflectors and lights were set up inside their homes. So he had to get the keys to all of their homes in order to be able to get there with the electricians and the technical staff to set up the lights properly every day.
Eu procurei um jornalista lá e disse, nós estamos, antes de começar as filmagens noturnas, nós precisamos de um gerador bom, grande, porque é muita luz que a gente vai usar. Ele disse, deixa comigo que na Petrobras tem geradores, eu vou arranjar para vocês.
So he met with a journalist there, and he said, we need, before we start the night shoot, we need a power generator, an electric, because we need a lot of light. And the guy said, "Oh, leave that to me. I'll go to Petrobras, the Brazilian oil company, state oil company. They have one there, and I can get it for you."
Se
And
te
that's when it all
convidarem,
started.
se te convidarem para fazer um filme na Bahia, não aceite. No dia seguinte, eu perguntei para o jornalista, que era jornalista da Manchete, da revista Manchete, e aí, como é, você conseguiu o gerador lá, na Petrobras? Ele virou para mim e disse, tem gerador na Petrobras? A Petrobras tem gerador?
So the following day, Roberto approached that newspaper, that journalist, and asked, "So where's the Petrobras generator?" And the guy said, "They have a generator at Petrobras. I didn't know that." So he says, "Be careful if someone invites you to shoot a film in Bahia."
Oh, no.
De manhã, chegavam os figurantes para a filmagem na escadaria. Então, tinha um rapaz que anotava o nome de cada um, tudo, tal, coisa. E quando chegava na hora de filmar, faltava gente.
So in the morning, the extras would go there to the stairwell, and a guy would take notes of all of their names. And by the time it was the time to start shooting, the people weren't there anymore. There were people missing. So.
Eles subiam a escadaria, tinha um portão lá em cima, por lá eles saíam e iam embora.
So they would go up the stairwell and then go away via a gate at the top.
Então, no dia seguinte, eu botei uma pessoa para fechar o portão lá em cima e para dizer para eles que tinha que ficar o dia todo. Eles concordavam, davam o nome todo e subiam e chegavam lá em cima e encontravam o portão fechado. Aí voltavam. E diziam, fecharam o portão lá, eu tenho que ir trabalhar no meu emprego, como é que eu vou sair?
So the following day, Roberto put a guy at the gate, closed the gate, and the guy would inform people they couldn't leave, they had to be there for the shoot. So people would go there and go up the stairwell and get to the gate and go down complaining, "I have to go to my job, I have to work. How can I leave? I have to leave."
E tem mais coisas. Teve o problema de fazer a filmagem da Santa subindo a escadaria.
They had some trouble shooting the scene where the saint goes up the stairwell.
A câmera que se usava era uma Mitchell, é uma câmera pesada, inglesa. O carrinho em que eu tinha mandado fazer, fizemos um carrinho lá, copiando o material francês que nos tinham alugado. Quando os franceses vieram procurar o material, viram a gente filmando, disseram, esse carrinho é nosso. Eu digo, não, esse não é o de vocês. O de vocês está lá dentro, manda buscar. Esse que eu mandei fazer aqui.
So they had a camera, an English camera, the Mitchell, which was very heavy, and they were doing a dolly shot, and some French guys there had lent them a dolly car, and when they went to get the car, they said, "They are using our car," and he said, "No, yours is inside, go get it."
One of the best shots ever shooting Brazilian film. I have to say that.
O Donny comenta que esse é um dos melhores planos já feitos na história do cinema brasileiro.
Então, eu vou contar para ele como foi feito. O trilho, para vocês terem uma ideia, o trilho saía de um nível do fim da escadaria. E ele tinha que fazer o que o Leonardo, o Pagador, ficava no canto, encostado na parede, na entrada da escadaria. Então,
the dolly tracks were set at the end of the stairs, and Leonardo Villar would be at the corner
da escadaria. Então, a câmera tinha que sair de um nível, né, saindo coisa para fazer assim e subir. E não há carrinho que aguente uma torção dessa, né?
So the camera had to go up the stairs, and no dolly car can take so much turning.
Essas cenas todas foram feitas com a câmera. A câmera ela vai apoiada em cima da cabeça do tripé. Era impossível fazer essa cena com essa formatura. Então, a solução que nós encontramos foi de colocar a câmera atravessada em cima do tripé.
So these scenes are usually shot with the camera attached to the head of the tripod, but it was impossible to make the movement they needed. So they fit the camera like sideways on the tripod.
Então, assim foi equilibrado essa volta da câmera sem perder o nível. Agora tinha que subir esse carrinho com tripé, com câmera, com cameraman em cima, e tudo isso tinha que subir aquela escada. E seria uma coisa impossível se não tivesse arranjado, no cais do porto, são umas peças assim, com carretéis dentro, e que a corda isso tem, como é o nome disso? É mourão, motão? Então moitão. Então, um moitão, são 2 moitões, que a corda faz 2, 3 voltas aqui, e essa fiação, essas cordas, vão para outro moitão. Então, amarra um moitão no carrinho, amarra um outro moitão lá em cima, na grade do portão de cima, e eu e a equipe pegávamos a ponta da corda e saía correndo, descendo a escada, puxando, que já tinha um outro para pegar lá, e tudo isso sem dar trepidação.
In order to get the camera up the stairs, they had to get some equipment from the harbor, which involved like reels to pass the ropes about, and they had to pull the ropes from up the stairs and from down the stairs. It's very complex. He described a very complex.
That's guerrilla filmmaking.
Yeah,
in its finest.
Então, essa filmagem essa preparação toda era feita para a filmagem da subida da Santa e da subida do Leonardo, o Pagador, atrás dela, né?
So that was the setup for the shot where the saint goes up the stairs and Leonardo goes behind it.
Roberto, please, one of the most iconic scenes of O Pagador, and it was also applauded in Cannes, is when the cross carrying the dead body of Zé do Burro goes over the lens of the camera, and it shows the church becoming upside down. Tell us how that was done, please.
The 90 degree shot. Yeah.
O Ricardo pergunta sobre aquele plano em que o Leonardo Vilar, Zé do Burro já morto, é carregado em cima da cruz e a cruz passa pela câmera e aí mostra a igreja de ponta cabeça. Como é que esse plano foi feito?
O Anselmo me falou que quando viu fizemos a primeira filmagem, ele entrava com com a câmera, com a cruz normal, ele deitado em cima, né? E aí ele, de noite, a gente jantou junto, ele disse, eu gostaria de fazer isso ao contrário, gostaria que ele continuasse, mas que a câmera virasse de cabeça para baixo.
So he says the first time they shot that shot, it was just a normal shot. He was lying there and the camera would go and there was no. And then at night when they were having dinner, Anselmo said he would like to try it differently. He would like to try this movement that when the camera would be backwards, upside down.
No dia seguinte, eu disse para ele, achei a solução, acho que vai dar, vamos fazer um teste. Eu mandei fazer dois paus assim, duas madeiras assim, embaixo elas presas num pé, botando pedras assim para fazer um L. Cada madeira tinha um pé.
So, então, so the next day, Roberto told Anselmo, I think I have the solution, let's try it. They got two stacks of wood and with rocks on the bottom, pedras forming an L shape.
Para fazer peso na madeira.
In order to pull the wood down.
Aí peguei um cano mais ou menos dessa grossura.
So he got a pipe.
Que esse plano, esse ferro descansava em cima das duas laterais.
Mm-hmm.
E nesse ferro eu mandei soldar uma chapa para fazer a base da câmera.
So he got an iron pipe and put it on the two wood pedestals, and he had it fixed there with.
Depois, numa oficina mecânica, o mecânico, quando ele vai trabalhar embaixo do automóvel, ele deita num carrinho que é uma espécie de uma prancha, né? E então eu ensaiei com o Geraldinho, que era o cameraman, um brasileiro mulato, e hoje não se pode falar essas coisas, mas tudo bem. Fiz um teste com o Geraldinho. A câmera ia assim, e quando o pagador vinha, né? Ela fazia isso. Ela virava do avesso.
So
a câmera não era nenhuma reflex, a câmera era uma Mitchell.
So he's describing how he rehearsed the movement with the cameraman and how it went below Leonardo Villar as he passed with the cross. And he reminds us that it was a Mitchell, not an Arriflex, so it was like a huge and heavy camera.
E aí está o Leonardo Villar entrando na igreja, a igreja de cabeça para baixo.
And that's how Leonardo Villar goes inside the church and it's upside down.
Depois eu tive, com a camaradagem do Anselmo, algumas cenas em que tinha padre, como é o bispo, o arcebispo e coisa e tal, com delegado de polícia que vem, que tem que tirar, que tem que botar. Aí umas cenas que ele ensaiava aquele jeito dele. Ele disse, Roberto, dirija essa merda aí que eu não estou aguentando mais essa gente. E eu vou tomar um café e descer para tomar um café. E eu tinha que filmar.
He says, in certain scenes involving lots of people, the bishop, the priest, policemen, etc., Anselmo would get fed up and turn to Roberto and say, "You direct this. I'm tired. I'm fed up. I'll go get a coffee." And so Roberto did.
Mas a gente era muito amigo. Aí, quando ele voltava, brincava, como é que fez? Eu digo, não, agora filma você para depois a gente ver qual é que ficou melhor, se a minha ou a tua.
And so when Anselmo would come back, Roberto would tell him, Anselmo would ask, "So how did it go? Is it good?" And then Roberto would tell him, no, now you do it. And then later we can compare which one is better.
So now we know who's responsible for the prize. Agora a gente sabe quem que é o responsável pelo prêmio, Roberto.
Pelo quê?
Pelo prêmio.
Pelo prêmio.
Não. O prêmio é que eu não tive tempo de ir a Cannes.
Roberto says he had no time to go to Cannes.
Foi.
É muita coisa. A gente, quando está filmando, como eu filmava com o Anselmo, que era uma camaradagem, uma amizade, um entendia o que o outro pensava, às vezes ele pegava a câmera de still e cheio de problema, de coisa e tal, a gente resolvia o que podia para fazer o still. Eu digo, Anselmo, deixa que eu faça o still. E aí dividimos o still do filme entre eu e ele durante todo o filme.
He says during the shoot, they were very close and they understood each other. And they decided to both be still photographers for the film. So one would do some of the still photography and then the other one. So it was him and Anselmo who did it.
Do Pagador eu não tomei parte só naquele início em que vem o Zé do Burro com a Rosa, com a Rosa, né? E eles fazendo a caminhada para chegar em Salvador.
He says the only part of the film that he wasn't there for the shoot was the first sequence when they are walking to Salvador.
E o Cinema Novo nunca perdoou a Palma de Ouro, porque eles viviam lambendo o cahier do cinema e nunca conseguiram nada.
Roberto says the Cinema Novo guys never forgave Anselmo for winning the Palme d'Or because they were always sucking up to the cahier do cinema and they couldn't win the Palme d'Or.
Ele dizia que fazer sucesso em Cannes ou na Europa era muito fácil. Fazer sucesso no Brasil é que era difícil.
So Anselmo used to say that being successful in Europe, in Cannes, was easy. In Brazil, that it was hard to be successful.
E Gustavo, there's a question no chat.
Yeah,
Would you mind?
I just saw it. Tem uma pergunta aqui no chat. As cenas na escadaria com as pessoas sambando e jogando capoeira foram filmadas com o pessoal tocando de verdade mesmo, e as cenas do quadro com o sino era da igreja mesmo ou era um lugar diferente?
A cena na escadaria, com aquela briga, aquela luta, aquela coisa toda, aquilo foi tudo real. Inclusive teve gente machucada.
So,
da igreja, o que é que você queria saber?
Sino.
Do sino, se o sino era da igreja mesmo, o sino tocando, o padre com sino.
O sino era... A gente fazia isso tudo que era possível fazer, a gente fazia. Usava de tudo.
So, the question is about whether the people there dancing, it's all, and playing...
Você está falando dos capoeiristas, né?
Sim, sim.
Que jogavam capoeira, eles tocavam berimbau, eles cantavam, eles tinham os tambores, aquilo tudo era original. Lógico que isso tudo foi gravado depois para ter uma qualidade maior para ser colocada, mas era como som guia.
So,
I guess so that would be dubbed later,
yeah. So the question is about whether the people dancing and playing capoeira and playing instruments are the real people, that if that really happened during the shoot. And he says yes, but the sound was added in later, and in order to have better quality of the sound, because they only recorded the sound for as a guide for the post-production.
Eu vou abrir um parêntese para falar alguma coisa do Vereda da Salvação. O Anselmo, quando terminou o Pagador de Promessas, ele logo depois ele entrou no Vereda da Salvação como ideia para um futuro filme para festival.
Okay, so he says he's going to add some info about Vereda da Salvação. He says right after Anselmo finished O Pagador de Promessas, he got this idea for a new film to get into festivals, and it was Vereda da Salvação.
Ele chamou para fazer o filme o Ricardo Aranovich, que, por sua vez, pediu que ele usasse o negativo Dupont, porque ele era mais seco, mais contrastado.
So Anselmo invited Ricardo Aronovich to join the crew as the cinematographer, and Ricardo asked him to use a film print called Dupont, because it was... Era o quê?
Ele era mais contrastado e mais árido.
Oh, it had better contrast, and it was more dry.
Yeah.
Okay.
Era mais cinzento,
Okay, more grayish.
E não tinha no Brasil, ninguém importava o Dupont. Então eu vim a Nova York, comprei na Dupont o material todo e levei para ele. Foi a minha maior participação no Vereda.
So at the time, it was impossible to buy Dupont film in Brazil. So Roberto went to New York and bought it and brought it back to Brazil. And that was his participation in Vereda da Salvação.
Wow.
Para finalizar a Vereda da Salvação, o filme Vereda da Salvação foi para o Festival de Berlim em 65.
So Vereda da Salvação got into the Berlin Film Festival in 65.
Quando terminou o festival, o Vereda da Salvação estava empatado com um filme do...
Alphaville.
Do
Godard.
Alphaville.
Do Godard. O filme do Godard. O presidente do festival chamava-se Eli de Azeredo. Era cronista de cinema no Rio de Janeiro.
So by the end of the festival, Godard's Alphaville and Vereda were tied, and the president of the festival was Eli Azeredo, a film critic.
Ele era o presidente do festival.
And from Brazil too.
Yes, from Brazil too.
Eu acho que ele era do Jornal do Brasil, não era?
Yeah, he was. Não sei. He was a film critic in Brazil.
Os dois filmes empatados, o Alphaville e o Vereda da Salvação, e o júri empatou.
There was the films were tied during the voting by the jury.
O presidente do festival é que teria o voto de Minerva. De um lado tinha o grupo do Godard e do outro lado tinha o grupo do Cinema Novo.
And the president of the festival, Eli Azeredo, would solve the tie-in. He would pick which film would be in the... And there were two factions, so to speak, the Cinema Novo guys and the Godard guys.
O Davi Neves, que era o diretor de cinema do Cinema Novo,
Davi Neves, a Cinema Novo guy,
entrou na sala onde estavam os brasileiros para dizer: ganhamos.
so he went into the room with all the Brazilians and told them, "We won."
Ganhamos era o festival ganho por Godard. Eles torciam contra o Anselmo.
And what he meant was Godard won the prize, so they were rooting against Anselmo.
It's very sad. É muito triste. And maybe Donny, maybe you can speak a little bit about the fate of the film. I really consider it to be one of the forgotten masterpieces of Brazilian cinema, one of the best films of the 60s in Brazil, and a work that has retained its power, I think, still to this day, but very, very little spoken about. Not a film on the Brazilian film critics list of 100 best Brazilian films, really overlooked. So I'm wondering, maybe you can speak quickly, Donny, about it being this overlooked masterpiece, and what to you makes it such an essential work of the 60s and such an essential work in the filmography of Anselmo Duarte.
Sure, you put it right. It's a forgotten masterpiece, actually, from our cinema. And when Anselmo did that, when he actually filmed Vereda da Salvação back in '64, you have to think that we were going through a political process very complicated at the time. Yeah, 64 and 65, actually. And somehow Anselmo knew that having been the greatest winner of Cannes in '62, he would be able to actually invest some efforts in a more personal style. So that's what he did when he filmed Vereda da Salvação. If you watch the film, if you guys that are watching us, if you people who are watching us have the chance to watch to Vereda da Salvação, you're going to realize that it's a very modern film, actually. It is not a mockery of Nouvelle Vague. It is not a mockery of new realism in Italy. I'm not saying that Cinema Novo is a mockery. Far from that, I really praise the directors of Cinema Novo, and they are in the very core of my studies in Brazilian film history. But what I try to say is when Anselmo really understood what was going on in Europe as far as filmmaking was concerned at that time, that was too late, because Cinema Novo here in Brazil had somehow articulated itself around filmmakers and the media. Obviously, when you want to start a new film movement, a new artistic movement, you need the media, backing you up, so that you have the somehow you have the newspapers and you have the magazines, to back you up with the things you're doing. And Cinema Novo was very efficient in doing that. And Anselmo knew that Vereda da Salvação would be a flop. He knew. He says that in his book, and he said that later. I knew it was not going to be a box office success, but I hope that the critics would understand that I was in, as when you talk about new cinema, when you talk about like a aesthetic revolution, I'm up for this, so. And then we go to a situation which I call almost Freudian situation. You have to actually kill your father so that you can exist. Like they had to somehow desauthorize Vereda da Salvação and o Pagador de Promessa. and this sort of thing, so that they could start all over and start something, propose something new, when actually they actually, neglect the fact that Anselmo was doing that prior to them, and that he could actually help them and teach them, not teach like in a very, paternal way, but, like open gates for them to do new stuff, to do new things. But we are talking about São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro again. And that's a situation that goes on up to nowadays. And when I say that is because Vereda da Salvação seems to me a very revolutionary film, it is very, like it is direct. It deals with urgent subjects that were very in vogue at that time, like the countryman, like how the progress and how the modernity was like pushing these people, and how it was oppressing these people. He started with all that. The meanest thing actually I read about O Pagador de Promessa, and that reverberates to Vereda da Salvação, is that Anselmo somehow had um, appropriated himself with a theme of a left side oriented ideology. That means the peasant and the questions of land and everything, and treated that with a right oriented discourse in this film, right? That's nonsense to me, because if you look closely to Pagador de Promessas and Vereda da Salvação, you see quite the contrary, yeah. Because actually, if we assume this as a truth, then if we assume that as a true statement, then we would have to look to Black God, White Devils, Glauber's Deus e o Diabo na Terra do Sol, as a film who actually deals with a theme that it's oriented to the left ideology, treated as a right ideology, because everyone gets killed in the end. Yeah. So and Vereda da Salvação and Terra em Transe as well, and many other films of Cinema Novo as well. And Vereda da Salvação somehow inaugurates, starts a very new cinema made in São Paulo. But again, I say it's a new cinema. It was not Cinema Novo. When we talk about Cinema Novo, we are talking about a very specific group of people, backed up by the media. And that is the sort of thing we would do in Berlin with Vereda da Salvação, to actually consolidate the new movement.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and there's certainly no doubt as well that the state of the digital copy of the film has also been a barrier perhaps to some people discovering it. But one thing I do want to ask Ricardo, and really, well, first I'd like to say that one of the defining things of the film is perhaps the performance of Raul Cortez, and he is a very famous theater actor. He is fairly well known in cinema, but at least in my personal opinion, this is his most intense performance. This is a life-changing performance to see. And Ricardo, I understand you were a little bit older by the time of Vereda da Salvação, and I understand you were on the set of the film actually. So I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit about being on the set of Vereda da Salvação, and I believe you also had seen Raul Cortez on the set. So what was his presence like going through taking on the role of a character who is a religious fanatic, is a religious occultist, and someone who essentially goes crazy? It's a very powerful, it's a very scary role to watch. And can you talk about the atmosphere on the set of that film?
Well, before I answer these questions, William, I would like to add a few thoughts about what Donny just said. My father considered himself as a person, a non-political person. He was apolitical. He considered himself primarily as a storyteller, a guy who enjoyed to tell stories through films. But he never used his filmmaking for political reasons. He was not political. On his grave, I had written there. It is written on his tomb. Here lies a storyteller. With regard to Vereda, I spent a whole week at the set. As a matter of fact, I shared the same room with Raul Cortez. So I had an opportunity to see Raul acting and my dad directing. Anselmo was a very tough director, very demanding, very intense. Raul Cortez, the same. He was very intense. I don't know if Donny, was Vereda one of the first films of Raul? Can you tell me that? Donny?
I think he went out for a bit, but
I believe it was.
I think, yeah, probably. I can't think of any films before.
I'm looking it up right now.
Donny.
I understand that Raul, up to that time of Vereda, he was a theater actor. I don't know of any film before Vereda.
It was his first film, yes.
He was, yeah. He came from TBC, Teatro Brasileiro de Comédia, and then he had his chance in films with Anselmo Duarte.
Yes, it was his first role.
So that may explain why Raul was taking that opportunity so seriously. He was very intense. And just like Anselmo, every film that Anselmo directed, he was in full immersion, 24 hours a day. And I remember in many occasions during the shooting of Vereda, all the actors and actresses were like walking at the top of their toes. And as a matter of fact, I don't know if you know that, but I don't know of any actor or actress who took part in my dad's films who accepted or who took part again in another film. Nobody wanted to film again in a film made by Duarte because he was very demanding. But Raul, on the contrary, he was a very professional person, very, very strict to the point of being professional. He was, to a certain extent, a little bit unsure of how he could better perform his role in Vereda because it was his first film. And Anselmo was at that time already well known internationally. Not many people know, but O Pagador de Promessas was the first film in the Southern Hemisphere, not just in South America, to be nominated for the Oscar. And he was the first until now, the only Brazilian film who won the Palme d'Or in Cannes. So to Raul, making that film, he accepting that Anselmo's invitation to to be the main role character in the film was to Raul a very important step in his career. I think, that's it, William.
Thank you. So it's 8 p.m. right now, and we've been speaking for 2 hours. So I don't think we're going to have the time to really speak about Guilherme do Pagiu, but I do want to say that we are publishing an article this upcoming week on the film by Lucas Tossais Thiago, and I encourage people to check out that article. What I want to do, because I think this is probably a good time to maybe conclude our conversation, is I want to see whether you, Ricardo, Roberto Ribeiro, or Donny Correia have any lasting thoughts or any thing that you would like to share. And let's begin with Roberto Ribeiro. Gustavo, please just check in with him to see if there's any final ideas or thoughts that you'd like to share.
Então,
Hi, may I say something? Last words?
Sure. Yes, sure.
Okay. If Anselmo was alive today, and if he were here taking part of this conversation, I'm quite sure that he would want to send a message to all future filmmakers in Brazil or in the world. No matter who you are, your background, your social stature, your social status quo, it doesn't matter if you're rich or poor. Believe in yourself. It is possible. It is possible to reach and accomplish your dream, just like Anselmo did throughout his life.
Thank you, Ricardo.
Nós já estamos perto do encerramento, porque já tem mais de 2 horas que estamos aqui na conversa. Queremos perguntar ao Roberto se o senhor tem algumas considerações finais para fazer.
A respeito do nosso amigo Ricardo Duarte, ele falou aí com a minha colocação do Festival de Berlim, o Anselmo, ele citou, e eu assino embaixo, que o Anselmo procurou sempre ajudar. Inclusive, ele levou o Glauber Rocha para um festival de Cannes por camaradagem, porque o Glauber chegou para ele e disse: "Pô, estou louco para ir, mas não tenho dinheiro." Ele disse: "Eu te levo." Nem por isso melhorou a posição dele junto ao clã do cinema novo.
So Roberto adds to Ricardo's remarks that Anselmo was always out to help people. He says that one time Glauber wanted to go to the Cannes Film Festival when he had no money, and Anselmo said, "That doesn't matter, I'll take you with me." And they went together, but that didn't do anything to make the relationship between Anselmo and the Cinema Novo crew any better.
E outra coisa, no Vereda da Salvação, aí, pelo que eu entendi da live, falou-se muito no sincretismo religioso, nas pessoas que se apropriam da religião para tirar benefício próprio, essa coisa toda, e falou-se muito disso, mas não se falou de uma outra coisa, que até a minha mulher disse: mas o americano não faz isso, que é o dono da terra que expulsa o trabalhador. Aí eu disse para ela: "Você parece que não viu Shane."
Verdade.
Alan Ladd.
So he adds that in discussing Vereda da Salvação, we also have to mention the question of the landowner who expels the settlers, and he says that his wife mentioned something about Americans not getting that, and he said, "Well, haven't you seen Shane with Alan Ladd?" So yeah, it's
Obrigado, Roberto. Oh, Roberto, seu mic.
Gostaria de conhecer pessoalmente o Duarte, eu não sei onde ele mora, no Rio. O ponto de referência para vocês é o Ricardo, que vocês têm mais ligação com ele. Pelo Ricardo, vocês chegam até onde eu estiver, seja onde for. Prazer vê-los novamente.
prazer é nosso.
Agradeço em nome do meu amigo Alexandro, que está aqui do meu lado.
Obrigado, Alessandro. Obrigado, Alessandro. Obrigado.
He wants to thank Alessandro, who helped him with the technical issues.
Thank you. And Donny, do you yourself have any concluding thoughts or ideas you'd like to share?
William.
Sim, can you hear me?
Gustavo, pergunta ao William que nota ele dá para a nossa live.
Roberto asks, what would you rate our live talk, William?
10 out of 10.
10 out of 10. 10 de 10.
Thank you very much.
Donny, I can't hear you right now. I think your mic might have disconnected somehow.
You can?
Nope, can't hear you.
Nope.
Oh,
Nope.
yeah, we're good.
We're good now, yeah?
Yes.
Okay, good. I would like to say that I'm very glad that we have spent the last couple of hours talking about such a remarkable figure in the history of Brazilian filmmaking, being Anselmo Duarte, because not even in Brazil, we have taken the time to discuss the role of the very important figures we have. For instance, we spend much of the time, like rivalizing, like discussing which is better, Anselmo Duarte, Walter Hugo Cury, Luiz Sérgio Persson, or Cinema Novo. And it's not about that, you see. It's not about that. But maybe you, William, who's American, who's seeing that from a different perspective, notices that that's not the case. But here in Brazil, we tend to, like rivalize everything. Everything must be, one thing must be better than the other, one thing must be worse than the other, and that's not the case, because meanwhile, while we are wasting our time discussing who's better and who's worse, the culture, the Brazilian culture itself is being destroyed. The Cinemateca Brasileira is being destroyed, is left astray, and it's going to catch fire and it's going to be destroyed if nobody does something immediately. So the case is not discussing who's better and who's worse. The case is discussing Brazilian cinema is as rich as we could guess from this very conversation here. And we spent just 2 hours on that, right? Imagine if we had the time to study that profoundly, to go deep into the subject and to bring out, like great genius we had, not only Anselmo Duarte, but we have people who came before him and offered a grasp of what Brazilian film could be if only we had this sense of union, this sense of industry. Because here in Brazil, I don't see a film industry in long term or short term or whatever, because every time it's all about, like trying to put a group against the other and discussing what is best, what is worst, and things like this. Anselmo Duarte showed us, I think it's clear enough here, that it's quite possible to work on an artistic and critical cinema at the same time. You can do a very deep film, a film that discusses in depth political stuff, but at the same time, it could be a popular means of, like a popular like I forgot the word. Like that could be absorbed by the general masses, who goes to cinema. Obviously, Cinema Novo thought about, let's say, a popular revolution throughout film. What the Soviets thought about, like in 1920s. Yeah, so we were delayed as usual. But if we forget all about this, and we think about the cultural production, then I think we would go further and stop like and stop this situation where we're always trying to like point out, like pinpoint who's doing best, who's doing worse. This film is politically engaged, this is not the question. After all, we're all producing culture and we're all trying to talk about our reality and the things that makes us uneased and things like this. So Anselmo Duarte maybe is the most representative filmmaker we had, uh, coming from the 50s through the 60s. Unfortunately, in the 70s, we have some uh, um, more complicated situation. He invested in some other films that may not be the subject here, but nonetheless, Anselmo Duarte, I think, is one of the greatest, and he should be praised for that. And again, I'm very glad that we took this time to discuss his importance for our cinema.
Thank you, Donny. And I once again, I want to thank both yourself, Donny. I want to thank Gustavo Menezes for translating tonight. I want to thank Roberto Ribeiro. Muito obrigado, Roberto. Thank you for being here and for participating and sharing your priceless experiences as a filmmaker and as a cultural worker in Brazil throughout the 20th century. It was an incredible honor for us all to hear your stories. And I hope there is an opportunity in the future for you to continue sharing them. And I hope more people come to you. Such incredible stuff. I want to really thank Ricardo Duarte. Without Ricardo, none of this would have been possible. The whole retrospective from the beginning, Ricardo was open arms, was so open to allowing us to translate the films, allow us to commission the articles about the films, to start a larger conversation about what is really one of the great 20th century Brazilian artists. So it's been such an honor for the Cine Limite team to present these films, to continue to present them, to talk about them. And I hope there's a continued opportunity in the future for more dialogues around the work and life of Anselmo Duarte.